There are 4 levels of understanding the Seder. Really understanding the Haggadah, which is part of the Seder. The first level that we're going to try to understand it on is the simple level, or I would even call it the obvious level. Something that even someone who knew nothing about Judaism would be able to sort of see and then understand easily what's going on. The second level is the level of halakha, how halakha looks at it, but on a national historical type of level. The third one is on a theological level, and the fourth one is on a mystical and psychological level, how it affects us personally. Now, I just want to sort of give examples of the 4 levels. The first one we said, the first one, the simple level, I would say it's basically passing down the tradition or the heritage. So it's a practical type of exercise that we're doing to teach our children. Any teacher walking in the room might understand, oh, this is how I would do it also if I was running a class. The second one, we're dealing with redemption or the birth of a nation, and that's the historical aspect, the nationalistic aspect. The theological aspect of this, in general, God is hidden. God runs the world. We've talked about this before, but God runs the world from a hidden place. We can see God is hidden. Most people don't know He's there. Most people don't care. Most people live their lives without God. We know God is there, but God is hidden. And the Kabbalists call this tzimtzum. The Kabbalists call this constriction, tzimtzum. The only way that the world could be created, that God could create the world, was for God to, so to speak, withdraw, to create a space in the world that looked like it was empty of His presence. Because if God was here all the time, then nobody would ever do anything wrong. When the policeman is standing right there, nobody's going to run the red light, nobody's going to double park, nobody's going to violate the parking laws, right? Because they know that if they do that, they're getting a ticket. So no one's going to do that. So if God was revealed in front of us all the time, then nobody would sin, and the purpose of the world is for people to have a choice, whether to do good or evil. And the only way that this purpose can be realized is when God is hidden. There are 2 times in the history of the world where God revealed Himself. The first one is creation. I guess nobody was there to see it, but there was nothing, and God created the world. It was clear that God is creating the world. The second time is Yetziat Mitzrayim, is the redemption from Egypt. And we'll see in the Haggadah, God reveals Himself, and God says, I'm doing this alone, I'm not using any sort of intermediaries or angels. God Himself, God's self, redeemed us from Egypt. And the Jewish people testify to God's existence, really, God's revelation, in 2 ways. One is Shabbat, and Shabbat, the very purpose of Shabbat, is to recognize that God created the world, and then God finished creation. God stopped creating, and in the Kiddush and in the prayers, we always remember that. We remind ourselves of that that because 6th day God created the world in 6 days, on the 7th day God rested. So Shabbat is a testimony. Oti le'olam, it's a sign for the forever that God created the world. Jewish people testify to God's existence, Shabbat. The second one is when we remember Yetziat Mitzrayim, when we remember the redemption from Egypt. And we do that twice a day in the Kriyat Shema, and also in the Kiddush and other prayers. But the main event is Pesach, and the climax of Pesach is the Seder. So the Seder is a testimony that God, to the existence of God. God revealed himself. And the Seder, the Jewish people through the Seder are testifying. It's a testimony.
What about during the time of the first temple? When God manifested himself on the altar and in the Holy of Holies?
But there were signs. There was a sign on the Holy of Holies that the Jews were redeemed, that the Jews were received atonement. The thread turned from red to white, or the fire came down. I mean, there were miracles, but it wasn't a revelation like the Exodus, where God himself. That's what God says. So that's on a theological level. And then when we experience this redemption, we're also experiencing a personal redemption. I mean, it's not just a national story. It's not just a macro event, but it's a micro event. It's a redemption for each of us.